Today's podcast is brought to you by Cheeky, a line of bar-quality syrups and juices for the home. If you're someone who loves craft cocktails but does not love the work, Cheeky may be for you. Check out the core 8 flavors plus the newly released limited edition espresso syrup at cheekycocktails.co and enter the code Movers and Shakers at checkout for 10% off your first order.
Movers and Shakers, the podcast about people and ideas that are changing the beverage landscape. Now here's our host, April Wachtel.
Hey, movers and shakers. It's your host, April Wachtel, and I'm so excited to share today's interview with the man, the myth, the legend, David Gluckman. David is the author of the book That Shit Will Never Sell, and is the creator of Bailey's, the #1 selling liqueur in history, which has sold billions of bottles across 160 countries. David is also the mind behind Ciroc Vodka, Tanqueray 10, and dozens of other beverage brands. In the podcast today, we discuss the story of Bailey's and what David learned after presenting the brand to his clients, David's advice on advancing ideas through large organizations, what large companies should do with their market research budgets, and so much more. David is truly a living legend in the world of beverage alcohol, and he shared a wealth of knowledge in today's conversation. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with David Gluckman. David, thank you so much for joining me on the Movers and Shakers podcast. How are you today?
I'm really very good. It could be sunnier, but apart from that, no, it's nice and spring-like in London at the moment.
Amazing. Well, I think many of our listeners would actually know you and know a lot about your background, but I'd love to hear in your words how you created this amazing career that you've had, how you got into the drinks business in the first place.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in South Africa, went to university there, and came out of university with no clear idea what I wanted to do with my life. But luckily for me, my father had been reading a book called Madison Avenue, USA, which is about advertising. And I think is one of the most famous books written on advertising at that time, the late 50s. I read it and thought, this looks pretty interesting to me. I went around to various advertising agencies in Johannesburg, managed to land a job. Because I respectably earned a suit, and because I'd been to university, they decided that I should become an account executive, which was something I then did for 10 years and regretted it increasingly over that decade. It was not the job that I really thought I'd signed up for, and I wanted to do something rather more creative. But I found myself at age 30, having crossed the pond to England in 1961 and joined an agency, but at age 30, I was still very unsettled. And I managed to persuade my boss at the agency in which I was working to set up a department to help companies develop new products. He asked me what I knew about it, and I said, not much, but I'm prepared to read and prepared to learn. And so we set up a tiny department, 2 guys, a copywriter and myself, offering companies the opportunity to develop new brands. And during about the first month of working, I went on a seminar to Stresa on Lake Maggiore in Italy and met a man who was in the drinks business. He'd come to give a talk to us, and I was the person invited to take him out to dinner that night because I was the only English speaker, I think native English speaker in the group. And he worked for a company called IDV, which later, much later, became Diageo. And he and I established a very good friendship. And I remember sitting at a bar at Stresa, looking at all the bottles of drink on the shelf and chatting to him. And he was giving me history of how they'd happened and what they were. And I became utterly entranced by it and said to him at the end of the evening, look, we've set up this new department. Any chance that you're giving us some business? And he said, yeah, I'd be delighted. And that was the beginning of a relationship which started in 1969 and ended in 2005. So I was an outside consultant for 36 years, which was amazing. And I had just something I could add. I think there were two very useful, formative experiences for me in my advertising background up to that point. One was that I worked on Procter and Gamble business. And Procter and Gamble business was not exciting, it was not romantic, but it kept me honest. It told me that whatever I'd be doing in this industry, it would be to do with selling products to people. And P&G products were about as ordinary as they could be. They were soap, toilet soap and hard soaps and stuff like that. And I think that I've always had at the back of my mind that the task that I have in developing a new brand is persuading first a retailer and then a consumer to buy this particular product. And I know drink is different and it's romantic and it's exciting, but that underneath it all, the bedrock of everything is that you're selling a product. You're going to somebody and saying, do you want to try another vodka? Do you want to try another gin? And here's a good reason why you should do that. So that formed me to a large extent. The other experience, which was rather more dramatic, was the agency was given the job to transform Irish butter from a commodity, which commanded a very low retail price, into a brand. And the agency, and once I was the prime mover, I was just a junior member of the team. We created the Kerrygold brand, working for an amazingly charismatic Irishman called A.J.F. O'Reilly, who later became the president of Heinz in the US and is one of the most famous business superstars of the 20th century. But he was an amazing man to work with. And Kerrygold was more than a brand. It was about helping to transform an economy, because Ireland is very much an agricultural economy. So those are the two most formative parts of my background. Mm-hmm. But now I found myself, 1969, with a drinks client and just the sheer excitement of developing things, creating new brands. And I've been doing it ever since.
So you wrote this amazing book, That Shit Will Never Sell, and it starts, at least, with the story of Bailey's, and you are one of the creators of Bailey's. I'd love to hear more about that journey, because obviously the Kerrygold experience led into the creation of Bailey's. And then I'd love to talk a little bit more about innovation and what you think works and what doesn't later as well.
Okay, Bailey's was interesting. It was, I think my partner and I called it the brief from hell. Because what happened was that the Irish finance minister passed a law which said that any company that developed a new brand for export, and that wasn't just drink, it was anything, would be given a 10-year tax holiday. Now, that's a fantastic offer, particularly if the brand's successful. And this message went to the CEO of the company in Ireland, then across the water to head office, then to my particular client, and onto my desk. And that was the brief from hell, because we had no idea what sort of preferences people had. We had no idea of what their production strengths were or their preferences were. That was it. Just give us an alcoholic drink for export, period. I didn't even know what the client, I never met the client until the day we presented it. The end user was completely unfamiliar to me. But I was sitting in my office. We had split from the agency by then and set up independently in 1973. And this brief came in about a week after we'd started in business. Tiny office in Soho in London. And I said to my partner, what are we going to do about this Irish brief? Is there anything in my Kerrygold background that will have a bearing on it? And he said rather languidly and unenthusiastically, what happens if we mix Irish whiskey and cream? So I'm an action man. So I said to him, okay, let's go and find out. So we went down to the local supermarket, bought some Irish whiskey and bought some cream, came back to the office, mixed them up, tasted disgusting. And there was no way we could make them taste palatable. So I said, no, we can still do this. Let's go back to the supermarket. And we found some powdered drinking chocolate. went back to the office, mixed it in, added sugar, and it began to taste very nice. If somebody had said, what were the proportions that you'd used? I had no idea. I could not remember. It was just a mix and match, mix and taste. That became the prototype. I thought it looked terrific. My partner, who was less adventurous than me and very staid, ex-Eton and Oxford chap, said he wasn't so sure about it, but I was absolutely convinced. Jumped in a cab, went across to York Gate, where the client's office was, and said to a man called Tom Jago, I think this is going to help solve our Irish brief. He tasted it, looked at it, and said, fantastic, let's do it. I said, can you do it? And he said, no idea, but we can try. We know where we're going. So let's take it to the R&D guys and try. So that was the first step. We had the product, which was incredibly important. And then we had to find a name, because you can't really design a package until you've got a name. And we were moving office, and we were moving to an office 2 streets down from where we were. And we went along that afternoon just to inspect the premises. And there underneath the office was a small bistro called Bailey's Bistro. And when you develop a brand, you think about it 24 hours a day. You go to sleep worried about it. You wake up the next morning and think about it. And I remembered something that O'Reilly had said to me 10 years earlier on the Kerrygold experience. He said, if you ever use a family name to develop an Irish brand, don't use one like his. O'Reilly's Irish Cream. I said, why not? He said, because Irish surnames have a tendency to sound whimsical. So therefore, don't choose a typically Irish name. And that stuck in my head. And it popped out when I saw Bailey's. And I thought, Bailey's Irish Cream. That sounds terrific. Let's use that. Called up my client.
Wait, sorry to interrupt. He said, don't use it because it sounds whimsical.
Don't use typically Irish names like O'Reilly or McGillicuddy or stuff like that. Use Anglo-Irish names, if you like. Bailey's was more of an English name than an Irish name. It could be Anglo-Irish. So that's all we called it. I mean, there were no alternatives, no options. And Bailey's, it became quite interesting because the restaurant didn't have an apostrophe between the Y and the S, which was incorrect usage if you think about it, because it's the restaurant, the bistro of Bailey. And Bailey's, the brand name, doesn't have an apostrophe I. So that was the next stage in the procedure. We then had a pack developed. The product was optimized by the technical people over a period of about 6 months. And then we suddenly found ourselves going to Dublin on a cold, miserable, late October morning to present the idea to some people I'd never met. And we went with one idea. And one of the things I said to my client in London was, why don't we dress up the bottle completely? Let's have labels printed. And this is very unusual in 1973. You didn't do that kind of thing. We didn't have computers to make everything look real, but we printed up the labels at some expense. We also did some research. We did, I think, 3 focus groups. And the male group, they rejected it. They said it was a girl's drink and they wouldn't be seen dead drinking it. But their glasses were all empty at the end of the group. And women described it as like kaolin and morphine, which is a well-known diarrhea remedy of the time.
Very sexy.
So we decided to suppress the information. And I never gave the report to the client until the 10th anniversary party. And I think Bailey sold 4 million cases that year. So nobody was going to issue any blame. But we took it to Dublin and we presented it. I think what helped me a little bit was the fact that I'd worked on Kerrygold. So that gave me some credentials because I had no track record in developing drinks brands at that point. And to my surprise and delight, the Irish absolutely loved it. and agreed to go ahead with it. So it launched a year later.
Mm-hmm. So the title of your book, That Shit Will Never Sell, implies, and you obviously underscore this at various points in the book, that even people who are very well informed in the industry, and oftentimes those are the people we're speaking about, they can't actually predict what will sell and what won't sell, because people assumed Bailey's would be a failure. Now it's sold billions of bottles, number one selling liqueur in history, it's distributed in over 160 countries. And it seems like there were a lot of doubters. So I'd love to lean into that further. Why do you think people can't predict what's going to work? And how do you think about launching products knowing that it's more or less unpredictable what will work and what won't work?
I think the one thing that I could say with absolute certainty is that market research will never, ever either prevent you from failing or indicate whether you're successful. And in fact, the man who said that shit will never sell is one of my heroes. He's a guy he's a New Yorker. Well, he's sadly dead now, but he's a New Yorker called Abe Rosenberg, who ran a company called the Paddington Corporation. And he was the man who was responsible for making J&B a massive success in the US market. He also, I think, was behind Sambuca Romana. And he was one of those great heroes. And the CEO of the London company took Bailey's to New York, showed it to him, and he said, that shit will never sell. But give him his credit, he took it on and was instrumental in making it successful in the US market. So he was wrong, but probably happy to be.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned this to you prior to our call, but the audience for this podcast, a lot of people who own businesses, who are starting businesses, or aspiring entrepreneurs, suppliers, distributors, etc., very heavy trade focus within beverage alcohol. There's people, obviously, who can launch brands, sometimes multiple brands like yourself, and it to be a success. And there's people who could launch, 100 brands and it not work out. So there've got to be some factors that we can affect to make something have a higher likelihood of success versus not. And I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that.
I think the successes, a lot of it is down to individualism. If you look at the successful brands over the last, I don't know how many years, they've all come from the work of individuals. Yeah. These individuals are all my heroes, people like Sidney Frank, who built Jägermeister and built Goose. And I'm sure they didn't go on huge amounts of research, information and analysis, etc. They went with their instinct and judgment about the market. Mm-hmm. Another hero is Michel Roux of Bombay Sapphire. I mean, he took a brand that was going absolutely nowhere, transformed it almost single-handedly. He commissioned a new pack design and made the band incredibly successful. So I think a lot of it's got to do with individual commitment, individual understanding, relationships in the marketplace. I think Abe Rosenberg probably went to a focus group in his life because he had a great instinct about the business and how to sell product. And I think those elements of salesmanship are still incredibly important. I know the rules are changing and communication is changing. The internet is much more important than it ever was before. It's hugely influential. You have influential marketing, influencer marketing. So therefore you see Diageo paying $1 billion for George Clooney's tequila and $500 million for Ryan Reynolds' aviation gin. That's happened. And you have people like Diddy taking over Ciroc, which is one of my brands. The influences are very important. I also think one of the salutary lessons of working for as long as I have in the business of selling ideas is that you come to learn very early on that, heroic as you may think you are yourself, the real hero is the guy at the other side of the table who picks up, he's got a career path to consider. He's got corporate investment to take into account. If this guy had said to me when I took Bailey's in, sorry, not our kind of thing, that would have been the end of it.
Yeah.
And Bailey's would never have existed. The guy in Dublin who had to make a financial commitment to building plant, etc., to make Bailey's, he was committed to it. It was an unknown quantity.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's to do with supply drive. It's not consumer demand. I think that a lot of these people were great supply drivers. They foisted their brands on, and they were good brands too.
So then we obviously talked about with Bailey's, we talked about the product, how you came up with the product, how you came up with the name. I know in the book you talk about how you basically used a sketch for the label that was generated, I think you said 30 minutes, or it was a very short time for the artist to generate the sketch for what became the final label. So I'm just trying to pick apart the pieces of what works, what doesn't work, and why. And you obviously had a hand in a ton of other brands, some that worked really well and some that didn't, and some like Ciroc that wasn't working super well. But then when Diddy came on board, worked incredibly well. And I'm just trying to extract some information for maybe founders of brands, people who are fighting the good fight right now, trying to build their brands, and they're probably getting some traction, but maybe it hasn't blown up in the way that they want it to. So there's a conversation I've been having with a lot of these founders recently where it's you can hit the gas and pour all the money into growth and hopefully grow super fast and get a lot of traction. Or you can just stay in the game long enough for your product to reach critical mass, or you can do a combination of the two. And I just love to hear what your thoughts are on that, because we're all going to have failures. We're all going to have moments of failure. And I do think in this business, staying in the business long enough to make a difference is a huge part of success.
Well, I can't give you as much information about what happens after the idea has been developed, because my experience is when I've had nothing to do with Bailey's as a brand since 1974, which is probably before you were born, but literally you hand it over and somebody else runs with it, and that's life. But Bailey's formed me in many ways and taught me a number of things that I would counsel everybody else to think about. I never went back to a client after Bailey's with more than one idea.
Love that.
Never, ever. There was always one idea. This is the best thing that I can possibly do, given the brief and the requirements that you've made. I can't do anything better than this, not now anyway. And if the client didn't like it, then I'd go back and start again. But that never happened. The client always bought. Secondly, I never dealt with middle management. I never had a successful brand that worked because it was commissioned by middle management, because middle management's afraid of failing. Therefore, they have to have a huge number of safeguards to try and offset that success. I've seen brands which have spent $1 million before they even started, because people did so much research and tested so many options. The other thing is, I think the biggest single waste of money in modern marketing and in modern business is the exploration of options and alternatives. Let's not go with that name. Let's look at 6 names and see which one works. It's complete nonsense. We pay far too much respect to consumers and not enough respect to the expertise of protagonists. And I think market researchers are a great escape from making a decision, taking a judgment. Consumers like what they know, but they don't know what they like or what they will like. And also, you're always dealing. I read a piece on LinkedIn a while back called Sour Cola. And I said, if I were competing with Coke, I would aim for the ankles, not for the heart, because you can't compete with on its own level. You have to try and create a bit of irritation away from the mainstream of Coke. So I said, if you produce sour cola, it might appeal to 5% of Coke users, but 95% of people would totally reject it. But if those 5% could provide the basis for a successful market, sour cola, bitter cola, use whatever, you take something that will appeal to a tiny minority and build from there. And I think that's important. I do quite a lot of mentoring of young people, young startups in the UK, which I much enjoy. And one of the things about my book is that anybody who buys my book is entitled to an hour's consultation on Zoom, if they so desire. And I'm dealing with a couple of young guys from Trinity College in Dublin who just launched the 493rd brand of hard seltzer. They said, well, this is it. So I said, well, why is it better? Why is it better than anybody else's? And they gave me some kind of route to market internet story, which I didn't understand. And then I said, well, what are your flavors? So they said, we're doing strawberry and orange and lemon or something. I said, that's pretty boring. Everybody else is doing that. Yeah. I said, why didn't you do a heavy metal flavor? So they said, well, what does heavy metal taste like? I said, I've got no idea. It's whatever you want it to taste like. You can make it taste of marmalade, chilies, and chocolate. And as long as it tastes nice, you've got to develop something in your brand that people will talk about.
Yeah.
Because that's the way of the world now. And I think that you've got to take a stab at something that doesn't agree with the received wisdom of the day.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Seth Godin's work by chance?
Not particularly. I'm not a great reader of academic stuff.
He's a very interesting person, internet wise person, marketer, very thoughtful, observant individual. Mm-hmm. Receive sort of daily little paragraph newsletters, and I've read a bunch of his books. He talks about the diffusion of innovation and some of what you were describing of having a very niche audience that can grow into a bigger one if you want it to. He also talks about, I think this is in his book, The Purple Cow, he talks about how products used to be marketed using the TV industrial complex. So it was, product was designed and then it was monologue style, sent out, like all the messaging was sent out through TV and through radio, billboards and all that. And then he talks about how times are changing. And obviously we now have everybody with a cell phone or with a smartphone is now media. So I'm wondering what you think about if you were starting an idea now, how ideas diffuse now versus when you started, for example.
Oh, absolutely. I wish I understood the internet and that kind of diffusion, which is the first time I've heard somebody use that term for a while. It was coined by a man called Everett Rogers about 1,000 years ago. And I've heard it again from you today. I think the rules are very different. I mean, we tried that kind of thing back in the 80s. One of the senior guys at IDV was the global director of marketing. And he became a very close client of mine. And he had a great vision. And we were intrigued by the success of Perrier in the 70s and how people were prepared to pay almost the price of a bottle of wine for what effectively was soda water, or club soda, as you call it in America. And we said, if they could get that kind of price for something that doesn't taste any different from club soda, we can do that too. So we started to go into non-alcoholic, added value non-alcoholic drinks. And the first one off the rank was called Aqua Libra, which became one of the iconic drinks in the UK in the 1980s. It was incredibly successful. I think we got up to 1 million cases. And it sold for about 4 times the price of Coke and more than twice the price of Perrier. And it became, Princess Diana appeared in a profile on the Mail on Sunday, which was a very popular newspaper, in which she professed that Aqua Libra was one of her 3 favorite drinks.
Wow.
Bollinger, Jack Daniels, and Aqua Libra. And we couldn't have paid her for that. It was probably the best consumer endorsement of the time, but we sold it and we looked at selling it in unusual places. Yeah. My client said the best place to sell a product is in places where people will buy it, which sounds like a blinding glimpse of the obvious, but it's true.
So what's an example of a place that you sold it that was atypical?
I think we were looking at selling it in very smart West End hairdressers, for example. hot environment, people need to be refreshed from time to time. So that was one point. The second drink on the list was called Purdy's, which was a kind of revitalization drink. And the first, we targeted that at the entertainment industry. And the first case we sold was to Abbey Road Studios.
Oh, wow.
Where the Beatles stuff is produced. And I wanted to sell it to film sets and to rock bands and things like that. And I think they got out of the business when Diageo was beginning to form, and they wanted to focus on spirits and Guinness more than anything else. So the lovely thing is that even at my advanced age, I'm still learning an awful lot about the business and new stuff, which is incredibly exciting.
Yeah. So from where you sit, what do you think you need to do now, like you, abstract you, to break through the noise? Like what do brands need to do to break through the noise? And are there any examples you can share of brands you think are doing this really well?
I'm sure there are many. I suppose for me, I'm still an old-fashioned brand man in the sense that I genuinely believe that if I go in and talk to somebody and say, I want you to stock this, it's another vodka, I have to give them a logical reason for taking it. I'm incredibly disappointed with Ciroc, if you must know, because I developed the original idea of a grape vodka. Because the brief was Grey Goose is out there. It's occupying this very top tier in the vodka business. And we want to compete. And I said, I think the only way we compete is by being functionally different. And for some people, functionally better. And I remembered something somebody had said to me, I don't know, 15 years before in Tbilisi, in what was then Soviet Georgia, who said that they made vodka out of grapes. And I thought, what a great idea. Why don't we produce the world's first grape vodka? Now, nothing about Ciroc is about grapes. Mm-hmm. I asked somebody the other day, what's your favorite vodka? She said, Ciroc. I said, why? She said, I don't know. I said, what makes it special? She said, I haven't a clue. And I mean, to me, I'd be ramming white grapes down people's throat to persuade them to buy Ciroc. Because that's P&G again. Grapes aren't unattractive. I was very admiring of Tito Beverage, and I looked at his website. There, in amongst everything, was a line so smooth you can drink it straight. Yeah. And that's at the foundation of what he's offering. I know he's a glamorous Texan, he's American rather than foreign. And he's run a brilliant brand campaign. But underneath it all, he says, it's so smooth you can drink it straight. And that's a strong functional piece of persuasion for anybody who drinks vodka, for me, anyway.
So on that, you know that I have a little brand. And this is something I think of all the time as I try to understand, because I'm learning this also, where functionality starts and ends and where quote unquote branding starts and ends. And this is something where, so my background is working with a lot of trade, the high-end mixologists, where people want to know exactly what ingredients are in there, what process is used. Like they want to know all of those details. And they tend to be less obviously susceptible to some of the other things that you might say, like the lifestyle that goes around it or the bottle shape and aesthetic. And of course, they still engage with that, but there's another priority for them. So this is something I wonder all the time. And I'm wondering if you think there's a sort of like formula to the balance, or it's just getting things right for that particular brand.
I don't particularly believe much in the kind of the romance and the fantasy. And I'm not a great believer in neuroscience. Back to the Procter & Gamble thing, I think that function is far less important than benefit. You know, you look at brands. I was horrified when I developed Tanqueray 10, which was unique because it was based on the use of fresh botanicals, and it delivered a fresh, clean taste, which was intended to bring vodka drinkers across to gin. Because it didn't have that kind of dirty botanical flavor that you get with lots of juniper and stuff. So, and what did they put on the front of the Tanqueray 10 bottle when it was launched? batch distilled. I mean, it's complete and utter nonsense. Batch distilled. Who cares? Or handcrafted. You see, I don't think those things mean anything. Or, filtered through the knickers of nuns. I mean, I don't think those are all process stories which people build, and the process that give me a rational reason why I should buy this product.
And as an aside, have you seen the production video for Aviation Gin?
No.
Oh, it's brilliant. I think this is actually one that you would really appreciate. It's very tongue in cheek. It's making fun of every distiller video where they say, oh, and our process is the handcrafted, and then there's like the very sexy close up of the juniper berries. This is all tongue in cheek, where he has the distillers like doing a 4-hour silent meditation and then spraying every berry or every piece of citrus with the tears of the owner, Ryan Reynolds. It is very funny, and I think it just mocks literally everything that you're describing right now. So I would recommend checking it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just writing in my ebook, which I'm working on. I've decided to do something a bit different. I've got a thing called a retro section where I look back on brands that I've developed and make comments about them as to how, and it's very hard to argue with the successful ones. But I think all successful brands could be even better. And so I've got comments on Bailey's. I've got comments on Ciroc. And one of the areas that I've really commented on is the explosion of non-alcoholic spirits. And I've become one of the arch gainsayers of the category. I think it's utterly ludicrous.
I would love to hear more. Can you tell us more?
Do you remember that wonderful, you're probably too young to remember, but Bob Newhart did a wonderful sketch, an audio sketch about Nutty Walt, who was Sir Walter Raleigh, coming back from the colonies and saying, hey, fellas, it's Nutty Walt on the telephone. What have you got this time? And he's trying to sell him on the idea of tobacco. And it's hilarious. And I've written a sort of pastiche of that about non-alcoholic gin. I bought a bottle of Gordon's Zero the other day from this local supermarket. Now, it cost £1 less than Gordon's full strength, 40% alcohol. But basically what it is, gin-flavored water. It's zero alcohol, but it costs £1 less than Gordon's alcoholic gin. And it's good. For me, that's crazy. And then you add a tonic. And as the Fever Tree ads say, tonic is 3/4 of the flavor anyway. So what you're ending up with is gin-flavored water at a grossly expanded price. And people have to read my book to find out how to do it better, because I've created a rod for my own back by having at the end of each section a little line which says, okay, if you're so smart, what would you do? And I tell them what I would do.
Right. So we'll direct people to check out the ebook when it is available. But what do you think then is going to happen with the non-alc category? You and I spoke about this before offline, but what is clear to me is there is absolutely a need. There's people who feel excluded from the social occasion where everybody's drinking and they want to participate in the social occasion, but they don't want alcohol or they can't have alcohol. But it's a choice or it's something out of necessity. So there's clearly a need for something, but you think that the category is going to flatten, disappear?
It's going to change. It's going to change dramatically. I've got two ideas in my book where I suggest, and these are open for anyone who buys the book and use the ideas. I just think the market will change. I think there's no logic in spending $30 on a bottle of stuff that tastes of barely anything. It's crazy. It's just bad economics. It's bad for consumers. And I think the problem with consumers is that, first of all, I don't think people want to give up alcohol. I think they want to take more control, take back control, to use the Brexit statement of our beloved Prime Minister. They just want to be in control. They also don't want to be bored. And I think that's the whole essence of it, if you think about it, that the alternatives to alcohol are boring. I mean, beer makes the transition from 5% to 0. It's easy. It's not a big jump. And there's some very good non-alcoholic beers now. So if you like the taste of beer, I couldn't tell the difference in most cases.
Yeah.
Wine is a tough one. I think the future in wine for me would be about 5%. If you can get good wines at 5%, that would make a huge difference. So that if two of you could share a bottle of wine, which would be the equivalent to sharing a bottle of, in terms of alcohol intake,
Yeah.
that would work pretty well.
Yeah.
Spirits are really tough, but I think there's a way of turning the whole thing on its head, and it's going to be given away in 3 months' time.
Okay. Buy the book to find out.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it. So, David, what advice or insights might you have for our audience that I haven't asked you about yet?
If you're a big corporation, and most of my experience has been working with a giant corporation, the first thing I'd do would be I'd take your market research budget, cut it in half, and cut it in half again. I think people spend far too much money. They waste far too much money not making up their minds. So I think that's very important. Secondly, the two things that I learned about organizationally for new ideas is they have to go through top management in the company.
Yeah.
Because top management know you're going to fail. So my mantra was always, if you are going to fail, so fail quickly and fail cheaply.
Yeah.
You don't spend $1 million before you start because it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Spend far less money on research. Stop testing alternatives. Stop questioning judgment.
Yeah.
Stop saying there are 5 different liquids we should have. Which one should it be? Stop saying which one should it be and say this is what it should be.
Yeah.
I think you could save a huge amount of time, money, and everything else by doing that. That's what we did. All the best stuff came from a book by Tom Peters in 1972 called In Search of Excellence, where he advocated brand champions within companies, senior people who knew the business, understood the business, and didn't argue with how much research feedback that you'd had, what kind of level of assurance you had.
Yeah.
I think it's time for people to take control of their own thinking.
Yeah.
Also, stop using the word innovation quite so often. When you come up with a turnip and raspberry flavored tequila, don't call it innovation. That's the sort of thing you should do on a Friday afternoon. And it shouldn't take more than 2 hours.
Got it.
That's not innovation.
Yeah. So in conclusion, if you were a large company, you would acquire more existing businesses?
That's what companies do. I mean, my remit has always been to come up with ideas. Yeah. So I would go to a company and say, why don't you buy so-and-so's brand of this or that or anything else? Because influences don't last that long necessarily. Yeah. And somebody might have bought a Kevin Spacey gin sometime. That might not have gone very successfully.
Yes.
You probably better not put that in.
Okay, noted. Okay, great. So, David, where can people find you? Where can they buy your book? Where can they find your ebook?
They can find me. My email address is david@tswns, which is the abbreviation of thatshitwillneversell.net. And I'm on LinkedIn as a angry old man. And my book you can get with www.thatshitwillneversell.net and .com, and Amazon done me proud over the years. So they also sell at a very good price.
Yeah. And when is the ebook available?
When it's finished. I'd like to go for October 1.
Okay. 2022.
Although I might do it by the end of July when people go on vacation, because there's a lot of reading done in August.
Well, thank you so very much for your time today. It was so great speaking to you, and it's been a huge privilege. So thanks so much for coming on.
I'm delighted. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Movers and Shakers. Follow us on all social media at Movers S Shakers.